The Story Droid presents Trade Show, a short story written by Andrew Dressner, all rights reserved, narrated by using the voice Aodi in Google Gemini 2.5 Pro Preview TTS. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, events, and incidents are the products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Please don't continue listening if you're triggered by situations centered around a small amount of adult language and some alcohol use. Synth-Lab decided to send Delton to set up for a trade show in Las Vegas. The factory was busy getting ready to launch a new product and needed to have a positive reception at a security conference. Rick was presenting a few seminars, while Fred and Peter would meet with potential customers. None of them would have time to set up the booth. Everything was arranged: hotel, vendor list, and an itinerary. The flight was scheduled for the following week. A team worked around the clock to get the robot ready and prepared for shipment. Delton had to be present as it was finished and packed in boxes, which were then strapped to a pallet. He would be required to take some tools with him on the plane. The car picked him up from the factory at 5 a.m. to take him to the airport. Traffic was light as they made their way across town. The driver made small talk as they raced along the highway, making excellent time. He introduced himself as Chuck Kelly and has been to Vegas many times. "You'll have to check out the casinos and be careful of the dancers. They seem to be your friends, but all they want is money. My boss told me to stick to the schedule and not get into any trouble." Chuck nodded and laughed. "Don't forget to have a good time." As they pulled into the terminal, Delton thanked Chuck as he was handed his luggage. Having never flown before, it was confusing trying to find where to go. He showed his itinerary to a lady who directed him to a screen. It provided instructions on how to print out the boarding pass and at which gate the flight was assigned to. A strange thing happened while online waiting to pass through security. One of the guards checked Delton's ticket and directed him to a different line. It was shorter and had a sign stating it was for pre-screened passengers only. He passed through security and made his way to the gate, stopping off for coffee and a muffin, hoping comfort food would calm his nerves and prepare him for his first flight ever. The area began to fill up with others waiting for the same flight. While looking out the window, it seemed the plane was quite small and wouldn't accommodate everyone. Looks were deceiving, and everybody made it on board. The flight attendants proceeded to jam all of the luggage into the overhead bins. It seemed most people decided to bring as much as they could lug with them, without worrying if it will fit. It was interesting to watch the crew shift the bags around in an attempt to get them closed. Delton sat in the window seat on the right side, overlooking the wing. It was a curious thing watching the ground crew finish fueling up the plane. A flight attendant presented the emergency procedures while many of the passengers got settled. Some began watching videos as others were listening to music. The hum of the engines intensified as the plane lurched forward towards the runway. As the engines roared, the plane bounced around, attempting to reach the correct velocity to leave the ground. The rest of the flight was uneventful, and the 5.5 hours seemed to pass quickly. An announcement of their arrival came over the PA system. The sunlight poured in, causing a bright, even glow. Everyone began moving as if coming out of hibernation, packing up items and looking out the windows. The plane made a series of quick turns and began its descent in a radical downward angle. After the first of two big bumps, the roar of the engines filled the air, and the aircraft slowed. A few jolts forward, and it again bounced along and came to an abrupt stop. The lights came on, and the captain welcomed everyone to Las Vegas, provided the current time and temperature. It was all very exciting. Delton never had this kind of experience. Now it was time to find his bag, which he placed in one of the overhead bins. In the spot where he left it was a different bag, similar in shape and color, but not his. Panic set in as he searched frantically. It contained a few tools, clothes for a few days, and some product guides. He ran from the plane and began checking all the people's bags along the corridor. With his head hanging low, Delton returned to the gate. The attendant met him with a smile and handed him his bag. "You ran off the plane so quickly, we didn't get a chance to inform you that your bag had been moved." He nodded and thanked them while making his way to the bathroom, trying to catch his breath. Delton had to urinate badly and was in fear of not making it. It would have been a disaster if his bag were lost. He then remembered it also contained a pack of pricing guides that had just been printed. Glancing at the schedule, the freight was to be retrieved from the hotel loading dock and moved to a meeting room. Then he'd conduct the assembly and make system checks. A sign for the tram guided passengers to the baggage claim and ground transportation. It was bright and hot when he left the terminal. He'd hire a car and head to the Westgate Hotel, which was right next to the convention center. Fred wanted the robot close, and within walking distance was favorable. It was a quick walk across the staging area, where the setup crews placed empty crates. The driver was a man who looked to be in his mid-50s, pleasant and said very little. The trip took less than a half hour, and Delton was standing in front of a grand entrance. Buses and cabs made their way in and out of the immense multi-lane driveway. A man in a hotel uniform directed guests to various attractions. He got to the front desk, checked in, and got his room key. It seemed air travel didn't agree with him since he needed the bathroom again. Feeling quite ill, he was worried about not making it up to the room. Luck would have it, the room was located right outside the elevator, and a huge embarrassment was prevented. He spent a few minutes before heading down to find the shipment by washing his face and retrieving tools out of the luggage. He'd need to borrow something to cut the straps because it couldn't be brought on the plane. The loading dock was immense, and trying to find someone to help proved challenging. The hotel also housed some of the convention. Many crates were traveling back and forth on forklifts. After 20 minutes of looking and asking, Delton was able to get someone to locate the pallet. It would take another half hour to have it moved to the meeting room where it can be unwrapped and the robot assembled. A text message came in from Fred requesting status. After responding, the pallet was moved down the hall and into the room. The room was spacious, bright, and very cold. Having to borrow a pair of cutters from the loading dock manager to cut the straps took more time. The instructions needed to be carefully followed, or damage could occur. The head and torso were in one box, and the appendages were in 4 separate boxes. It must be assembled on the floor, in one of the other boxes containing a thick blue foam mat with the company logo on it. It was large enough to position all of the unassembled parts without any of them touching the floor. The fiber optic cables and braided tensioning bands coming out of the arms and legs would be attached to the torso. Once the unit was powered, the appendages would be drawn in and seat themselves. If one misaligned, Delton had a tool to use to reposition the link so it connect. At that point, the robot would be able to respond verbally and assist with any final adjustments. He'd done it hundreds of times with just a few issues. The robot resembled a human female of average height and weight. It was to blend in and surprise visitors, thinking it was a model hired locally. Another box contained clothing and a small bag of cosmetics. Delton hoped it knew how to apply them and, more importantly, dress itself. Before unboxing the unit, he moved 2 large room dividers to block the view from the doors. No one could see what he was doing once he began. It was the first line in the instructions to follow. Delton pulled the components out and laid them out on the mat, carefully positioning the parts to then attach them together. One false move and major damage could occur, and that would be the end of the show and his career. Things went well. It was amazing how realistic the unit was compared to the industrial models he was accustomed to working with. Its hair, lips, and other parts looked so real, it embarrassed him slightly while touching it. Once the assembly was completed, it was time to power it on. The next box contained a touch panel used to perform diagnostics and conduct emergency programming. The initialization would take 10 minutes and was called the first light. Zara was built 3 months ago based on the V3 framework. The unit had abilities in free thought and self-awareness. The details showed up on the screen as a progress bar moved from left to right. While the final commands were completed, Delton grabbed a white sheet from one of the boxes and laid it over the robot. Its skin began to change color, and the eyes started to blink. It also seemed capable of respiration. For what reason he could only guess is to maintain the authenticity of the simulation. The screen showed 90% complete, and the robot was connected to cellular data and confirmed some new commands sent from the factory. The arms and legs were drawn into the torso and made soft clicking sounds indicating successful connections. The robot sat up, and the sheet fell to its lap. "Hello, Delton. I'm Zara. Why did you place a sheet over me? It's not part of the instructions." "Yes, you're right, but I felt it was a good idea at the time. Now it does seem quite silly." "It's actually a good idea to treat me as human to maintain the deception for the presentations conducted during the next few days." Delton took a deep breath as the robot looked through the clothes and chose an outfit. He walked around the partitions and sat down on a chair next to the windows. The instructions include saving the packing materials and having them ready for use at the end of the show. But curiously, nothing about the procedure to dismantle and pack up the robot. Zara finished getting dressed and began applying the cosmetics. "Can you please come over here and open the last box?" Zara asked. The box contained a piece of luggage matching the one Delton had. He opened it, and Zara began putting clothes and other personal items into it. Once all the boxes were emptied, he stacked them back on the pallet and called the loading dock manager to retrieve them. Zara was to stay in the room with him, which caused Delton to become nervous. It was becoming a challenge to think of it as a machine, since seeming so real. The V3s were all fitted with a biocell. It could be used to provide power and aid in blending in. It also took time to calibrate by having to eat the right kinds of things at the right times during the day. If not, malfunctions happen. Zara decided not to eat but charge on the induction pad she pulled out of her handbag. Having the robot in the room turned out just fine. She took one of the beds and laid down, grabbed the touch panel, and began reading, as if it was a real woman winding down from a long day at work. She even changed to night clothes to preserve the condition of the dress. The instructions didn't mention anything about what to do with it before the following morning. Delton needed to get something to eat, so he decided to go down to the lobby. A restaurant was not far off to one side within the casino. All he wanted was soup and some bread, didn't have much of an appetite, which he chalked up to being anxious. He decided to check email on his phone and would sit and relax before returning to the room. Delton had to again pass through the casino to get to the elevators. It was full of smoke, loud and flashy. A lot of people were trying to tip the scale and win the pot. The odds were against them, and it didn't deter anyone from what he could see. Company policy prevented him from participating. The robot was still laying in bed, reading. Checking the status on his own touch panel, the dashboard showed all green and it was almost fully charged. He couldn't say the same thing about himself. It's been a long day, and tomorrow was the first day at the booth. They were to arrive at 8 a.m. to set everything up. Zara was to help so that others around would think she's human. Fred was very specific in how things were to occur while at the show. While washing up in the bathroom, it again felt strange having it in the room with him. Getting used to it would take some time. It, or she, seemed content just reading while charging up. He didn't know how to refer to it as. Delton got the strangest feeling Zara knew what he was thinking. The robot shut down at 1 a.m. to conserve battery and remained motionless until 7 a.m. Delton tossed and turned, finding it hard to sleep, and finally was able to at around 2 a.m. Peter, Rick, and Fred arrived in Las Vegas at around 6 p.m. Once at the hotel, they agreed to meet up for dinner in a nearby restaurant at 8. Fred got down early and sat at the bar drinking cranberry juice. No need to have a hangover for the following day, he thought. Out of the corner of his eye, Fred caught a glimpse of Delton leaving. He was about to wave at him, but put his hand down. As Rick approached, Peter pointed at Delton. "We'll see him in the morning. Don't want to stop him from getting back to the room." Zara sent a text message saying everything was going well. "Just spoke to Bert. He's still at the factory monitoring things," Rick said. "Good God, does that man ever sleep? Remind me to give him a raise if things go well here." Peter approached while talking to someone on his phone. He was hardly seen not doing that, having to get a battery pack due to his lengthy conversations. Running the business remotely kept him always on the phone with either the factory, engineering, or the bank. Rick was in charge of sales, and Fred ran the factory. Peter ordered a drink and apparently didn't have the same worries as Fred. Neither did Rick. The two of them were already onto their second before ordering food. "Are we all set?" Peter asked while they were seated.
I've checked with Delton. I saw him leaving the restaurant before you got here.
Zara said he got back to the room. No problems all day. I arranged for a couple of floor signs. A table and chairs will also be provided. I've told Delton they both need to be at the booth at 8 a.m. to set up. "That sounds good. My schedule has me running all over the place," Rick said as he took a sip from his glass. "Have you seen the numbers? Seems like the show's bigger than last year," Fred said. "Better be. God knows we need to sign some decent contracts to make it worth it," Peter said. "I got some ideas. I've sent you both the plan. Let me know if you have any changes before I send it to Zara." "You ready for the panel discussions? Seems like the moderator is already off the market," Peter asked. "Yeah, I saw the same article in the paper written by Rosenthal. It could work to our advantage," Rick said before taking a sip. Peter put his glass down. "Gentlemen, you've done a great job, and we have the best team behind us."
Peter had been through something similar. While running his prosthetics company, the medical conferences were bigger and seemed more competitive. The Odaris Risk product had been successful. The amount of positive exposure had given the company a boost in sales, but they still needed continued growth, he thought. They finished dinner and decided to call it a night. Rick went back to his room to review his notes for the sessions. Peter sat at a desk in his room and continued to answer emails until 1 a.m. Fred logged onto the server and checked the dashboards to make sure everything was still functioning. The cellular data connections were very strong at the hotel, and hopefully also at the convention center. They wouldn't rely on Wi-Fi and didn't want to connect to random signals. The show being all about security, many would attempt to break into anything and everything. It did pose an interesting possibility. What would happen if a hacker did gain access to their product? He thought before falling asleep. Delton woke at 6:45 a.m., proceeded to wash and get ready. Zara had already gotten dressed and waited for him. They both headed down to the lobby and out towards the convention center, which was a few yards to the south. Each were granted access by the guard by showing him badges hanging from their necks. A map of the hall helped direct them, and it took almost 7 minutes to get from the side entrance to the booth. The place was gigantic. Their space was surrounded by a couple of booths with aisles between them, a good distance from the others and close to the main meeting hall. A hanging banner with the company logo was centered above a round table. A small reception counter was placed at the front. Delton opened a bag and put out some of the materials he brought with him. The pricing guides were to be only handed to Peter. Zara grabbed a box that was sitting on the floor and brought it over. It contained trifold brochures, pens with company logos on them, and 2 big bags of candy. They both didn't know what the candy was for. It wasn't in the instructions, but after looking over at one of the neighboring booths, they saw how others have done it. It must be for visitors to take. Delton looked tired. He'd forgotten to eat, and it was a decent walk to get food. He began to worry. He hadn't had much of an appetite for as long as he could remember, hoping it was just nerves and wasn't coming down with the virus or something. Zara said she'd charge while waiting for him to return. She didn't want to do it in front of anyone, just like the instructions stated. The place served mainly coffee with the selection limited. He decided to sit and eat before heading back. He didn't want to make a mess at the booth and would also take the opportunity to use the bathroom. Zara hopped off the chair as 2 men approached. They were pushing a video screen attached to a rolling stand. "Hey, what's your name?" the shorter of the 2 men asked. "I'm Zara. Thanks for setting this up. My boss has a computer and wants to attach it to it. Do you have an HDMI cable?" "Got one right here. I'm Joe and this is Mike. You from around here? You do look familiar." "Yep. Work at Cityscape Dancing, but got this gig for the week." "Knew you looked familiar. Was working on the sound system last month and must have seen ya," Mike said.
She smiled at them as they finished and looked back at her before heading off. Delton returned and stood staring at the screen. Didn't know this was part of the setup. Was a last-minute addition. Fred asked me to take care of it. Delton nodded while falling into one of the chairs. Why would Peter trust the robot rather than me to deal with it? He asked himself. It wasn't a big deal, but still, did he lack confidence in him? Something deep inside began to well up. It was a small catastrophe that could have large implications. It also may have been his lack of energy. Something was definitely up. Peter and Fred got to the booth with a half an hour until the doors were to open. The lobby was crammed with people as the keynote ended. The show floor was going to fill up fast. A text message came in from the factory, and Fred decided to call Bert. "Hey, what's up? Power's at 30%, just to let you know."
Understood. We'll deal with it shortly.
"Thanks for the update. I'll keep you posted on this end," Fred said before ending the call. Peter and Fred had gotten to the session late and found seats at the back of the room. Artificial intelligence in its purest form is the future of surveillance and security, Rick said. Dr. Rosenthal from Arizona State jumped in. "You say current systems are old-fashioned? AI is already the standard. How do you recommend doing it differently?" "Eliminate low-resolution cameras along with their blind spots. Then what do you prescribe?" "Mobile systems that blend in," Rick said. "You sound like you live in some fairy tale land. Are you here to sell a book, get funding, or just feed your ego?" Rosenthal asked. "What a wonderful exchange of ideas. We know the truth. Cameras are here to stay, and I appreciate Mr. Compton's enthusiasm," Dr. Felix said, who was moderating. "The future holds more than any of you can imagine, and the present will shock the shit out of all of you. Your rock star behavior is irritating and ego-hollow," Rosenthal said. The session finished up with Dr. Eubank giving a lecture about directional microphone technology, where most of the audience had left halfway through. Prior to Rick's afternoon lecture was on the verge of cancellation. After his performance during the panel discussion, it became standing room only. Rumor had it that Rosenthal recruited many to sign up. Rick sent a message to the team asking them to join him in Salon E to prepare. After a brief explanation, Peter and Fred understood and made the changes to the presentation. They would also stick around to assist during the session. Both Delton and Zara were seated in the audience as the room began to fill. Rosenthal showed up with more than a dozen others who took seats in the front rows. The lights dimmed and the Sima video played, with a few laughs interrupting. The lights came up and the crowd applauded. "Wow, a cat. Why not a dolphin or a cockroach? AI-generated video is very impressive. My daughter can do that with her laptop. Can we see the cat?" Rosenthal asked. "Still waiting for show management to grant approval," Rick said. "How convenient," Rosenthal said, through a grin. The crowd turned to Rick as the room became silent. Rick asked Peter to play the second video. It showed clips from Delton's experience, starting from when he left the factory up until a few hours ago. "What does a video of a young man traveling to the conference have to do with anything? You have big ideas, but nothing to show for it. I'm not sure what you're doing here. Are you looking for funding for a non-existent product, or are you just plain stupid?" Rick turned to face Rosenthal. "You're right about a few things. We rented a booth, and I got myself on the panel just for exposure. We're new to the industry, and after having a few relationships develop with law enforcement, we decided to attend." Peter put up a photo of Odaris Risk version 1, mechanical biped, and the audience applauded. He then showed clips from news articles of how the robot saved a hiker. "We're the ones who made the robot and have come up with a new series that can infiltrate and provide covert surveillance. Delton and Zara, please stand. Both represent our latest products. Delton, also known as Demo 1, was programmed with an identity and instructed to act human." Rosenthal approached Delton. "Okay, prove he's a robot." Delton turned to Rosenthal and provided a detailed biography, and the crowd laughed. "Anyone can conduct this kind of trick. Prove that this young man is a robot," Rosenthal asked, voice loudening. Peter put a series of photos up on the screen of Delton during construction. That proves nothing. Delton changed his eye color, skin tone, and increased his body mass. Rosenthal almost fell back as the audience clapped and cheered. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Please comment below. We look forward to hearing from you. If you enjoyed this program, hit the like button and subscribe so you're informed as to when new stories are available.